All right. You're listening to the Common Man podcast. Today's guest is Sally. Is it Ivester?
You got it, Sally.
All
Ivester.
right. First try. You are I think you put a corporate whisperer I saw in your profile. So what does that mean?
Yeah, for sure. My goal is I want to help everyone become the top 1%. That's like really what it becomes. And when I talk about corporate whisperers, it sort of becomes like, what is this hidden game that we're all playing when we start a corporate job? And I think it's because the corporate job, it's the first time when you have like no idea what the rules are. You know how you're in high school or middle school, it became really clear if I do well in the beginner class, then I'll probably excel to the intermediate and then to the advanced. And you go from like 9th grade to 10th grade to 11th grade. That doesn't exist in a corporate job, right? It's sort of like up to you. You could probably stay at the same level forever. And it sort of becomes, what does success look like? How do I fight for success? And unfortunately, we don't live in like our grandparents' generation where you could work for the same company for like 30 or 40 years, retire and get a pension and do all of that kind of stuff. It doesn't exist today. And so the corporate whisperer, it's really on about like, how do we stop gatekeeping? And how do we just talk about the corporate game that we're in? And then how do we play this corporate game on easy mode so we can all become top talent, which in my mind is like the top 1%.
Wow, that's awesome. We're definitely going to get into that a little bit later, but I want to tell me about your background. I know you said first generation. So where did you grow up? How was that like?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in Houston, Texas, or slightly outside of Houston, Texas, in a small town. And it was one of those things where I knew I didn't quite fit in just the way that I looked, as well as like my last name and all of that kind of stuff. But I tried to fit in. And I was all about achievement. Right? The way that you fit in is how do you make sure that you're doing the right things like grades and trying to like do what everyone else is doing, which I know in today's generation, that's very different. Gen Z is growing up in a different way than the millennial that I grew up in. And what I essentially did was I followed this formula of if you do well in school, then you'll get into a good college. If you get into a good college, then that's going to unlock career. And once you have a career, you're done. And so I ended up going to like an Ivy League school, and I ended up going to get a great job outside of after I graduated from college. But the problem is that I had no idea what I was doing when I actually entered the corporate job. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna work hard. Because that's what I've been doing my entire life. Obviously, I'm going to work hard. I worked my butt off to get the interview. I worked my butt off to like prepare for the interview and to nail interviews and do all that stuff. I'll just work hard when I'm in the corporate job. Turns out it's not about working hard. And also I was like working hard in probably the wrong ways. And that's the type of stuff where I feel like a lot of people, when they start in the corporate world, regardless if it's like a big tech firm, consulting firm, banking or whatever, or you're starting at a mom and pop, right? Like you're just sort of in a corporate job, you're all facing these types of things. And it's all about how we can start unpacking where can you make the most impact so that you can essentially figure out how you can accelerate in your career faster. And there's a lot of stuff around the how that we never talk about either. I sort of call it my pitch framework, Lorenzo, where in my mind, there are 5 things that you need to nail in order for you to be top talent. And for me, it starts off with how you present yourself in your work, talks about impact, how you take feedback, how you collaborate with your coworkers, and then finally, how you make your manager your number one advocate. So I call it all hail your manager, right? So that's my pitch framework. And essentially, like I went in not knowing really any of that stuff, right? I didn't realize how important your manager was. I didn't realize that how you take feedback or like how manageable you are comes from whether or not you're able like to take some constructive feedback. I just didn't understand any of this kind of stuff. And this is the thing that I want to teach others. Like, what is this playbook? And then of course, how do you dive into it? And how do you like actually learn? How do you think about impact? How do you take feedback and being able to share that back with others?
And what would you tell somebody if they have maybe a first-time manager or a manager that's maybe not in their corner?
Yeah, totally. I love that you asked that question. And I actually think those are 2 different things, right? A manager who's a first-time manager and then a manager who may not like be in your corner. I think with the first-time manager thing, look, it's going to happen. If you're early on in your career, you're probably, unfortunately, you might be like the person's first report, right? Or first 2 reports or anything like that. And so I think there's a lot of you needing to coach or manage your manager. And quite honestly, regardless of what level you are, I think any manager sort of wants to be managed, right? Like they want their lives to be easier. They want you to be able to like tell them, hey, this is what I think, all of that kind of stuff. And so what I would say there is, how do you think about how you set yourself up for success, and how do you come off as a thought leader? Because then that's going to make them, give you some space. You won't have a micromanaging boss. And then it gives you the runway to continue proving things out and being really able to excel. I actually have a free career starter pack checklist. So if there's anyone who's starting off their first corporate job, I like to sort of nail 4 different things that you should be doing within the first few weeks. And I do it step by step, right? Because by the way, Lorenzo, I know you didn't ask this, but I am actually really fed up of all these things that tell you so much theory, right? Like it's just theory, but it becomes a question of like, how do you apply this theory? Like literally, what do you want me to do step by step? And so those are the types of things that I'm trying to lay out, because when I started, I really just wanted someone to tell me what to do and say, right? Like, how do you say, I don't understand? Like literally, how do you say that in like a corporate way? And I like, those are the types of things that I sort of want to ungatekeep and just sort of share back with others in terms of how I figure that out. But those are the types of like how-tos that I think could really be helpful. So that's just around like when you have a first-time boss. When you have someone who's not on your side, I'm going to answer it in a little indirect way, which is, I call this my work box theory. I don't know, Lorenzo, if you follow the influencer named Tinks. She's like a dating influencer. And she has this thing called box theory, which is when a guy meets a girl, he puts her in one of 3 boxes, right? He either wants to date you, sleep with you, or like doesn't really care about you. When I think about it, that totally applies to the workplace. And I call it the work box theory, which is when a manager meets a report, they either love you and want to invest in you. They either think you're average and you'll do average work, so they're going to give you average projects, or they really don't want you on their team. And if you are in a situation where like you're that person, I call them the Eeyore, when you're Eeyore with a person who they don't really want on the team, or you don't feel like you're jiving, or you're speaking totally different languages, I personally think there's not much you can do, because it's very hard to change someone's impression of you, especially when it becomes like a manager in a report. And that's because, Lorenzo, I don't know how many jobs you've had or like how much this resonates with you, but like managers are busy, right? Like if we just like step into the shoes of a manager, they got a crap ton of stuff going on. They have their own work. Then they have to manage you and probably other people as well. Then they're trying to increase like how many projects they have because they want to get promoted and all of that kind of stuff. And so they're busy. And when they see someone who may not be getting it, maybe a little bit harder to manage, all of that kind of stuff, in my mind, I'm like, you jump ship, right? You learn what you can, but then you try to find someone else who you can do better with. I'm not saying you can't learn. I'm not saying that you have to do this with every manager. I think this is walking a fine line, but it's just about like, how much more energy do you want to put into it? We can use like a dating analogy, right? Like how many times are you going to like go on a first date when you're like, you know what, didn't really fit? Or like you date someone for a few months and you're like, it doesn't really, we're not jiving, we're speaking different languages. That also happens in a manager and report situation. And so it sort of becomes, how do you set yourself up for success? And how do you start thinking about what you're going to look for next? And by the way, as you progress in your career, there's going to be very few people that you work with who you probably don't know, because you probably know this best, Lorenzo. Your network is your net worth, right? And so like new jobs or like future opportunities, they're probably going to come from the people that you're working with today. And so you're probably going to be like, you know what? I really love working with Lorenzo, and he's going to think about me for the next opportunity. And so then I'm going to work with him again. And so you have this rapport already built. So it's really early on in your career where I feel like you're starting things new and like making things fresh again.
Wow. That's really, really important. I love that box theory, because you always have the sense of feeling right with your managers or your coworkers, but it's hard to kind of pinpoint or understand. Or so like, how does even someone decipher that of what box they're in? What questions should we ask?
Yeah, that's a great question. Lorenzo, I love that you were diving deeper into it. The way that I sort of see this is, where are the projects going, right? Like who's getting the high visibility projects? It's sort of like if you think about a sports analogy, who's getting the plays, right? Like who's getting the most amount of just like airtime and all of that stuff. And if that's you, you're probably in my boss thinks my boss loves me and they want to invest in me type of box. Most of us are going to be in the average box, right? Like in the sense of we're doing average work. It might be great work, but it's still average. We're going to get average ratings. And that's because in the corporate job, there's just a natural bell curve. There's going to be a small amount who get the top rating, probably the majority who get the middle rating, and then like a small portion who get like, you need improvement. And so when you just think about that, the majority of us are going to end up in that middle bucket. The very top, the low part, that really becomes a question of like, are you and your boss getting along? Are you and your boss speaking the same language? Are you coming out of performance reviews feeling deflated and like you can't change anything? There are telltale signs that you can sort of pick up on, but the way that I really think about it that's really tangible is, where are the sexy projects going, right? And if it's not to you, then you're sort of like, okay, am I average or am I someone who's like potentially the Eeyore? And I got to tell you, Lorenzo, and I don't know how you feel about this, but it starts with yourself, right? Like we all have an ego. And that ego sometimes can be a good thing and sometimes can be a bad thing. And largely I found that it can be a bad thing where we're like, you know what? I'm this person. I went to this college. I have these accolades. I used to work for this company or whatever it would be. But if you really think about where you stand, you need to think about that without an ego. Like, are you actually just seen as someone who's average on this team? Are you seen as someone who might be that Eeyore, or are you seen as someone who might be like, you know what? They're going to invest in me. And I think that comes with almost like, it comes with age and maturity, because you sort of need that in order for you to be able to really think about yourself without like an ego or without thinking about it negatively.
I wanted to ask you, how was your first corporate job experience? What was going through your mind? How did it feel? And what made you want to, become chief of staff or, rise to the corporate ranks?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is so hard for me to think about that because I feel like I've had so many different types of flavors of corporate jobs. You work as an intern, you work as like a full-time employee, you take on like these little side projects and all of that stuff. But I think my first job out of college, I was a marketer. And, you're at the bottom of the rank and you're essentially like doing everything. And for me, I was always corporate because I feel like I'm this millennial, Lorenzo. I don't know how you, who you appeal to, but I appeal to these millennials where it's like, I got to get a job. I got to pay my rent. I got to try to like have health insurance, all of this kind of stuff. And that might also just be me coming from like an immigrant family and wanting to have security and making sure that, in my mind, the corporate job was like the path to security. And that's what led me to the corporate job. But I'll tell you, there's like peaks and valleys with the corporate job. There are a lot of things that you can't control. Yes, you can get things like healthcare. Yes, you can get things like increasing your network. You could have so many opportunities to learn. But the issue that I think a lot of people have with the corporate job is what you put in may not be what you get out, right? It's not like you're an entrepreneur where more effort you put in, you might be able to reap the benefits more. You could try so hard and nail it on so many different projects. But if there's no budget for promotions on your team, you're not going to get the promotion. And there is nothing that you did that could have controlled whether you got that promotion or not. And those are some of the things that I'm still trying to teach my clients in terms of like, let's try to differentiate between what you can control and what you can't control. And how can we focus on the areas that are going to help you become top talent that fit in the I can control bucket? Because ultimately, that's what's going to give you the best return on investment. And those are the types of things that I think I didn't think about enough when I was starting off in my corporate job. And if I were to think about what are the few pieces of advice I would give, I would think to start off, it starts with yourself. I don't know how you feel about Lorenzo. I want to hear about you, but I feel like the stories you tell yourself, they are going to be what gives you either a strong foundation or a weak foundation. And I bet you that foundation is going to be important because when the big storm brews and something comes and hits you, if you have a strong foundation, you're more likely to be able to withstand it. If you have a weak foundation, you're probably going to fall over. And that type of stuff happens all the time in the corporate job. Some of those types of storms could be, you get negative feedback, right? Yeah. Like you don't quite hit the target that you're supposed to. You made a mistake. all of those types of things. What are the stories we tell ourselves? How do we like roll with the punches? That all impacts how fast we can progress in this corporate job, and honestly, how nice we are to ourselves. So that would be one critical piece that I want everyone to know. What about you, Lorenzo? What do you think? What do you think about mindset, right? And like, what do you think about like having a strong foundation and it being sort of core to a lot of the things that we're doing?
Well, yeah, that's one of my next questions is in the new generation, or it's a lot of it is like, we grew up with YouTube, we grew up with the internet and all these resources and things like that. So my question, the next one would be, how important is school? How important is college and things like that? But before I get into that, I started working right after high school, and I learned how to navigate a career, how to speak corporate, sort of how to be the best I can, and add the most value. And that's always led me in the right direction, whether it's, promotion after promotion. It's because, like you said, it's like playing a game. You have to play the game. You have to navigate different types of relationships and personalities and speak to people on their level and be understanding and empathetic. And then, so it all comes into play.
And look at that, right? Like for your listeners, look at our different backgrounds in terms of what both led us here, right? Like you went from high school to like immediately working. I went from high school to college. And this is like where we are today. So to answer your question in terms of like, do you need a college education or do you not? I mean, I think you're looking at it, right? Like you and I are both here. We're both in the same place and we have diverse backgrounds and diverse experiences, and yet we've all made it. But I think the thing that I want everyone to think about is what you said, which is the one word value. That is like ultimately what you need to be doing. You need to be creating value for people, because that is ultimately what gets you seen as a thought leader. That's what gets you more opportunities. That's what gets you like a faster promotion, more money, better networks, all of that kind of stuff. And so value to me is something that you can learn in school, you cannot learn in school, but you always have to be driving value. The other component I'd say there is I want you to think ahead. And when I say think ahead, Lorenzo, it's sort of like, I see a storm's brewing. And most people might say, hey, there's storms brewing, like we should end. But the person who thinks ahead says, a storm's brewing. I think we should move this to 1 p.m. or 4 p.m. to avoid the storm. Yeah. Right. And that's sort of like keeping that momentum and keeping things going. You're not just saying like, oh yeah, this is the fact and that's it. But it's like, what do you do next? And those are the types of things I love to think about. And the formula that I use there is I anticipate with this as my recommendation. And that's like, that immediately signals to others, you know what, this person knows what they're doing. Regardless if you do or not, it becomes optics. I don't know if you've seen that, Lorenzo, but some people can be like, not the smartest people in the world, but the way that they present these types of things, people are like, yeah, I'm bought into it. And then they never really go deep into those details.
But then can I ask you on that? And as someone who reports to other people as well in the corporate world, we have that mindset, but then for me specifically, we have the fear of rejection, right? Yeah. And a lot of people I feel like can feel the same way. Is this idea stupid? Is this really going towards the corporate goals? Is this what they need? Or what if they brush me off and brush my idea off, or things like that?
Totally. And I think what you're talking about is maybe like this idea of imposter syndrome, right? It's like almost this negative self-talk that we tell ourselves. And that's why I come back to this idea of like, how strong is your constitution? Because look, I used to be so bad at getting feedback, right? Like I didn't play a ton of sports in high school or anything like that. I feel like people who play sports they do a little bit better with getting feedback just because you get so much feedback from a coach or anything like that. Like it's sort of like the reps that you get in. But I was so bad at getting feedback and I'd be so nervous before performance reviews. And like, I would be anxious. Like, what are they going to say about me?
Yeah.
And then I would take it so personally. But I think the unlock for me has there been truth in anything that people say? Like if we think if someone tells us that's a bad idea, like, is it a bad idea? Right? Like how do we literally remove ourselves from it? Right? And just be like, how can I hear this other person and just try to find some truth in what they're saying? Because at the end of the day, most people, whenever they say something, whether nice or not nice, there's like a kernel of truth. And it is so uncomfortable to sit in that feedback, but you have to try to do it. And these are the reps that you build in, right? You build up your resilience. You build up like, can I take this? Because that's honestly the only way that you get better. Look at feedback today. If you want to be a CEO or someone who's like a manager or someone executive, I bet you're going to get so much damn feedback, right? Or so much darn feedback. It's going to come at you in so many different directions. You think CEOs today don't get any feedback? Heck no, they get so much feedback. So if we don't start building this muscle now, it's going to be one of those things that's going to hurt us as we try to progress in our career. The second part I'd say about that though, really tactically, is I find that people who have imposter syndrome, and I have imposter syndrome in different ways now, it's because I don't have enough reps in, right? Like if I believe in what it is that I'm doing, if I believe in myself and like the value that I bring or the idea I'm pitching, then I'm not going to feel, I'm not going to take it as, I would say, personally. And so for anyone listening and you are suffering from imposter syndrome, I would say like, do you have enough reps in? Right? Like, do you actually believe in this idea? Like, are you someone who's like, you know what? I know 90% sure that this is going to be great. And the reason I say 90%, or honestly, it should be 80%, Lorenzo, is because we're never going to be at 100%, right? Like there's nothing in life that's 100%. So we have to make the best decision that we can with like the limited information that we have at the time. But like imposter syndrome doesn't go away. So then it sort of becomes, in my mind, just to sort of summarize, what are the stories you tell yourself? And how can you just start thinking about like, you know what, could this be bad? Right? Like, could they be right? Not in a way of like you just accept it, but just more so, let me try to understand this because what they're saying, it may make me better. And then I would say the second piece is if you think it's bad, it usually is coming from a place of potential self-doubt or like you probably don't have enough reps in. And so the more you build those reps, I think the stronger you're going to be when those types of things come into play.
What if you lack the skills necessary for, maybe the next position? How do you improve that?
Yeah. I mean, so I think that let's break that down for a second. I think that's an honest conversation that you need to have with yourself, right? In terms of like what's needed at the next level and can you actually play at that next level, right? Because what I would say, if I'm going from like minor league to major league and I'm not quite ready, I'm going to fail at major league. And that's going to be way worse than like I stayed a little bit too long in minor league, but when I went to major league, I could nail it. Right? Like you got to think about this. It sometimes is a matter of 6 months to a year. And in the grand scheme of things, most of us have to work until we're 65. And so like you can take the 6 months or 1 year or anything like that. But it sort of becomes a question of like, are you actually ready? Right? And if you don't think you are and you don't have the skills, I would specifically think about what are those specific skills that you need in order for you to play at that next level. And it can't be high level, right? It needs to be really tangibly. What do you need to do? What does Lorenzo need to do? Let's use you as an example, Lorenzo. It might be you need to be able to handle tough conversations with clients. You need to be able to hit larger revenue numbers with like key partnerships, whatever it would be. But the more concrete that you can be, the more that you know what the goal is at the end of the tunnel, and the more you're more likely to be able to hit it because you know what that goal is. You know what you need to work on. If it's high level, like you have to improve your communication. Like what way are you going to take it? Like you could take it 100 different ways. And so the more specific you can be, the better you are in terms of figuring out what step you need to take. The other thing I'd say there, if you're not quite there from a skill set and you nail like what the gaps are, get your manager bought in. We haven't talked about manager at all. And look, you could work for a consulting firm and it might be a staff or, whatever. Basically anyone who is giving you your performance review, dictating like your money, dictating the projects that you work on. They're going to be the ones who you want their buy-in on. And if you can show them, hey, here are the skills that I think I'm doing excellent at and I'm like ready for the next level. And here are the skills where I think I'm not quite there yet at the next level. I've brainstormed a few ideas of what it takes to get there. Do you have any inputs? That immediately signals to your manager that you're a thought leader. Right? And you're easy to manage because they don't have to come up with the ideas. They're the ones who can just react to your ideas. And that immediately puts you into like the driver's seat versus the passenger seat. I'm going to have a spiky point of view for a second, Lorenzo, and I want to get your take on the spiky point of view. But I think like inherently all people are a little bit lazy. Right? Like if you tell me I have to like do 20 steps in order for me to get something done, the chances of me doing all 20 are very slim. Versus if you tell me I need to do 1 to 2 things, or better yet, you do the one and you just want my reaction to it, that is much more likely for me to end up doing what it is that you're requesting. And so if we think about people are lazy, then the reaction is, how can I make this easier for someone else? And when you make it easier, it just makes them like you more. It makes you seem like a thought leader. And it also puts you in like the power position, which is a position that you'll want to be in.
And when you say thought leader, what does that mean? What is being a thought leader?
I think for me, being a thought leader is when people come to you for a specific topic. So that could be you have a huge expertise in how to drive partnerships with sports agencies. And then you become a thought leader in that, because anytime I have a question on that, I'm going to you, Lorenzo, right? And you know what? You may not have it, but you're going to have the brand of it because you're going to try to talk to people about things. You're going to try to showcase how you think forward. You're going to have new ideas and think ahead and do all of that kind of stuff. And that positions you as a thought leader in my mind. Basically, answer the question, if you want to be a thought leader in X topic, are people already coming to you today for it? Because if they're not, then I don't think you're being seen as a thought leader. If they are, then you already have that sort of badge of honor.
Is it better to have one area of expertise rather than someone in the corporate world maybe is really good at a lot of different things?
Yeah, gosh, Lorenzo, you're asking the hard-hitting questions. I love all of them. I want to get your perspective. I think it depends on your age and it depends on your point in career. With that said, the disclaimer is you can always pivot no matter when. I just think it becomes harder, depending on the time frame that you're in. I think in your 20s, you got to have different types of experiences. And the reason is because you probably don't know what you're good at yet. If you're 22 or you're 25 or you're 29, could you confidently tell me what your superpowers are? And part of knowing your superpowers, right? But part of knowing your superpowers is also you don't know what you don't know, right? If you've always only been in sales and you've never done anything in operations or done something in marketing, you never know whether or not you could be good at it. You never even knew that there could be jobs that could be awesome at sales and marketing combined or something like that. And so I think you need to open up just your repertoire in terms of what's out there. And that doesn't come just by me experiencing it. It also comes when I talk to different people, right? Where I'm like, what do you do? Literally, what do you do? If you have one day on Tuesday, September 10th, how do you spend your day? What are you doing during it? Those are great questions to ask because then you start to gather information of what's out there. When I look at top jobs out there, there are some jobs I'm I didn't even know that was a job, right? And those are the types of things where you don't want to be saying when you're 40, when you're 50, where you're I didn't even know that. And so those are the types of things I think you need to start experiencing when you're in your 20s. Then I think you start to get your reps in and you get the data points of what you're good at and what you're not. And you didn't ask this, Lorenzo, but I'm going to say it, which is you got to lean into the things that you're good at. A common mistake that junior people make, and I made this for so long, is I try to elevate my weaknesses, right? I try to double down and be I'm going to improve my weaknesses so much and it's going to be great and all of that stuff. And the thing is that if I were to spend my time on weaknesses, I would still be at average because it's not my superpower. But if I were to spend the same amount of energy and time on things that I'm great at, I would be world class at those things. And those world class things, that's what people are going to come to you for expertise on. That's what's going to be making you a thought leader. And that's ultimately where I think you should be spending your time. So I want everyone to experience if they're in their 20s. And I want you to take notes. I call it corporate church, Lorenzo, because I'm in marketing. I believe in alliteration. There's nothing religious about it, but just church happens every single week at a certain time. I think all of us need to build in time in our schedule to reflect. What worked well? What didn't work well? How do I want to pivot now? Right? Because if you don't do reflection, you're just a hamster in a hamster wheel and you can always continue to execute. But if you don't reflect on what works and what doesn't work, then you're never going to continue getting better at a super speed.
And how often circling back to feedback, how often should we ask for feedback and who do we ask it from?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Circling back, what a corporate word to use, Lorenzo. Personally, I believe in, two things. I believe in real-time feedback because nothing's better than you do something and you know right there and then what the feedback would be. Maybe you present in front of 30 people. What's the quick feedback, right? Was it good? Was it bad? If good, how so? If bad, how so? And I think real time is going to be critical. So if I were you, I would think about what are some of these key things that are coming up that you're going to want feedback on. Some of it could be presentations. Some of it could be like a slide deck that you're creating. Some of it could be like a sales pitch that you're making for a partner, but it's like you need that real-time feedback. The second key piece is I would say it really depends on like, what does your company's rating cycle look like? 1 year is way too long. A lot of people split it up into quarters, like every 3 months. Some people split it up into half year, but those are like formal performance reviews and like formal check-ins. And so I really would just like, I would tweak it because let's say your company does it twice a year. You don't want to be hearing this feedback when like during that performance review. You want to do a check-in like maybe a month or two beforehand so that you can start working on it and start like executing on it. Because if you hear about things twice a year, that doesn't give you a lot of time to execute on the feedback that you're hearing. So I would say, just to sort of summarize, get real-time feedback, then like figure out what your performance review cycles are at your job, and then build additional sessions around that just so that you have the time and space to execute on what you're hearing so that you can accelerate faster.
So there's so much good information. I can't wait to listen to this again and unpack it. But as we're running a little out of time here, I want to wrap up. I want to ask you where people can find you, get connected with you, follow you, get your, I think your course, right? You have your course on your website.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You can find me at sallyivester.com. I have my course right now. It's 4 weeks. And basically what I'm trying to tell you is what's a playbook for being top talent. And I focus on like individual contributors who are in their early career era. But check me out at sallyivester.com. You'll find some free resources there, links to my course. And then honestly, if you have any questions, reach out, right? I think all of that's going to be super critical. My goal, Lorenzo, is I just want to stop gatekeeping. Right? Like I want to be able to help out the person who I was when I was 22, who had great parents, but like I couldn't rely on them to tell me what to do, right? Like there was no playbook to follow. And I want to be able to help others who are in that position.
And is your course free, or what does that look like?
It's $499. It's a 4-week cohort and you get those lessons forever. And those are the types of things where I'm just hearing like great feedback, right? Like this is awesome. Like we break it down in like really tangible examples and like we make it fun. And ultimately what you come away with are just these essential skills that you set you up for your future, because they're not just things that you do today. They're things that are going to help you out in your like career from here on out. But this is my inaugural course. And so we've discounted it to $499 because it's the first time I'm doing it. And then we're just going to continue running it and hoping to help hoping to help more people.
Awesome. That's so fun. Little last question here at the end. If there was a billboard, you saw someone driving by it, you could put anything on the billboard. What would you have it say?
I think I would say there are 3 things to corporate success. 1, work loudly. 2, think ahead. And 3, build your foundation. The other thing I'd say, you didn't ask me. The other thing I'd say I would say, go from new hire to top talent. That's going to
be your second billboard.
Yeah, that's you know how they have like, I live near LA and I feel like it's just like when you drive down like one of those highways, it's just all of these darn just, these lawyers, who are trying to sell like car accidents and all that stuff. It would be like 5 of them, message 1, message 2, message 3, all of those types of things. But that's how I would do it. Look, at the end of the day, none of this is rocket science, but it does come down to like, how do you actually execute it, right? It's like making a pizza. Making a pizza is the same 10 steps in Italy as it is in America, as it is in like China or something like that. But like to nail every step of making a pizza, that's what make it great or really terrible, right? Yeah. And so it all comes down to like how we work together to really make you great and how we finesse it to fit like your particular style and everything else, just so that you can make sure that you land well.
I love that. It's a perfect way to end this. Thank you so much for the valuable information. Like I said, I can't wait to listen back and taking all the knowledge.
I can't wait to, Lorenzo. Thank you so much for the time. Thank you, listeners. Reach out at Sally Ivester and let's connect on LinkedIn, at the very least. So thank you all so much for the time.